What's up, you guys, and welcome back to my channel. If you can't tell, I am incredibly excited today, and that's because I have a massive announcement for you guys. So, the big announcement is that John Lorden from Lorden Arts and I will be at CrimeCon 2019 this year on Podcasters Row, representing Crime After Crime and also our YouTube channels separately. I cannot even begin to explain, you guys, how excited I am for this. This is actually where I got to meet John Lorden last year. It's where the idea of Crime After Crime was created. I got to meet so many of you guys last year at CrimeCon. And if you're not aware of what CrimeCon is, it's basically this giant true crime convention that will be the most amazing experience you've probably ever had in your life, and that is not an exaggeration. Last year I got to meet all the people from the Mara Murray documentary. James Renner was there last year. Everyone from Cold Justice was there. Nancy Grace was there. I mean, I was walking by people in the hallway that I have watched on TV and looked up to, and people in the FBI and private investigators and different detectives, and it was the craziest experience I think I have ever had, hands down. We were on Podcast Row last year, which is where we will be again this year. So you guys will be able to come up and pretty much meet us whenever you want to. We will be at our table for most of the time, all of the days of the event. So this year, CrimeCon is in New Orleans from June 7th to June 9th. So a Friday through a Sunday. And I cannot wait to meet you guys there. This year, the list so far of people attending has my jaw on the floor. David Rudolph is going to be there. He represented Michael Peterson, which, if you're not aware, that is the staircase that went huge on Netflix this year, which is crazy because actually my husband's dad helped on that case, so I cannot wait to pick this man's brain if I'm able to. I also know that I think the district attorney that helped work with the prosecutor in the O.J. Simpson case is going to be there this year. There's also a lot of different podcasts. I think The Trail Went Cold's going to be there, Trace Evidence, Crime Junkie, which is absolutely one of my favorites, Generation Y is going to be there. There's just going to be a lot of fun things happening this year, and to kind of add to that, John and I will be doing something incredibly exciting for CrimeCon. So you've probably heard me talk about the Without Warning podcast. That's by Sheila Wysocki, a private investigator. She specifically is known lately for her coverage of the Lauren A.G. case, and I'm sure a lot of you, first of all, are aware of that case, and you've probably heard me talk about Sheila hundreds of times. We met her last year, and she did something called the PI Experience, and basically what the PI Experience is she picks a case that she covers on her podcast, and months ahead of the case, if you sign up for the PI Experience, it is an extra charge separate from your CrimeCon ticket. You are sent all this information on this case. I'm talking, documents on it. I'm talking, possible autopsy reports, just all sorts of evidence and things found on the case, and you're able to go through everything. And there's a private Facebook group where you get to go and talk to other people about it and brainstorm. And John and I this year will actually be a part of that. We will kind of be doing these live podcasts on the Facebook group where we give you guys cliff notes of kind of what's happening, and we walk through the case together. And this is all leading up to the PI Experience itself, which is the Thursday before CrimeCon starts, which is a Friday. Basically, you're broken up into groups, and each group is assigned a private investigator that personally walks you through the case. And it's not just you talk about it, they actually have things set up, like parts of the crime scene. It's a bunch of different exhibits, basically, that you get to go through and have a very hands-on experience to understand the case more. And at the very end of it, John and I also will be walking through it, but we are also going to be doing a live podcast afterwards to kind of sum everything up, and we will have a handful of people in the room with us to come up and say their theories and ask their questions. So it's going to be incredibly interactive, incredibly fun. John and I are so excited. It's going to be such an awesome experience, you guys. It's going to be like nothing you've ever experienced before. And on that note, we have an awesome discount code for you guys when you get your tickets. So if you are interested in going to CrimeCon 2019, you can use our code CrimeAfterCrime19, and that will get you guys 10% off on your tickets. And it's just the standard passes. Now, what I will say is the standard passes do sell out incredibly quickly. They sold out last year. I can only assume they will probably sell out faster this year because this is only the third year, I'm pretty sure, CrimeCon has been in existence, and every year the growth is absolutely insane. So I definitely recommend getting your tickets sooner rather than later. And John and I actually wanted to do something special for you guys to really show our appreciation, and that's why we set up something fun for the first 10 people to buy tickets with that discount code. So not only will you guys get, if you're in the first 10, all of the merch and things we're bringing stickers and magnets and all kinds of stuff. I haven't even finalized my list yet. He's going to be giving away his old brain scratch pens that were a massive hit last year. We also will be giving you guys a Crime After Crime stress ball that's shaped like a cop car, and we'll also be giving you a limited edition t-shirt that you will use as your entry to our very first meetup drink up. So John and I kind of formulated this idea because we wanted to do something special with you guys, and the first 10 people will get to go to this meetup with John and I for about an hour, either on Friday night or Saturday night of the event, and we will buy you guys your first round of drinks, whether that's a beer or soda, and we'll get to talk about life and cases, the podcast, things that you've experienced in the event so far. So it's basically going to be a really, really exciting weekend, and I hope you guys are interested in going. So if you want to make sure that you are one of the first 10 before you purchase your ticket, all you have to do is go to either the Crime After Crime YouTube page, where you can see in the community tab, we will let you know if the 10 have been taken up. And you can also go to the Twitter page at Crime After Pod, and when you go there, the pinned tweet will either be our announcement video that we make on Crime After Crime, or we will have another pinned tweet saying that all the 10 are taken up. But that's pretty much it, you guys. I know that was kind of a massive announcement and intro, but you guys know, if you've been here for a while, how much I loved CrimeCon last year. It put such a fire under my butt to come back and do even greater things with my channel. It was so inspiring getting to meet a lot of the people that I've looked up to for so many years. You leave with so much knowledge. It is so incredible, and you get to experience things there that you would never get to experience in your day-to-day life. So I personally highly recommend it. I cannot wait to meet you guys. I will definitely be doing a handful of random giveaways. I'm trying to plan like fun scavenger hunts or something to do throughout CrimeCon for you guys, and I'm just so excited. So I can't wait to see how many of you guys end up being interested in going, and I can't wait to actually go out and have a few drinks and hang out with you guys if you are in the first 10. All you have to do after you've bought your ticket to confirm that you are in the top 10 is to email us. I will have the email listed down below. It is crimeaftercrime@lordenarts.com, and you just have to put first 10 in the subject line. Whew, now that I have that exciting announcement out of the way that took so much longer than I was hoping it was going to take, I'm going to go ahead and jump right into today's video. So today's video, I'm going to be talking about a serial killer, and honestly, I'm kind of surprised I haven't seen this covered anywhere on YouTube yet, because he is one of the most prolific serial killers in all history, and especially in Britain. This was a very, very big deal. It happened kind of in the same location as the Moors murders, which was, already something terrible this community had to go through, and now they're dealing with a second serial killer, technically a third. But this man is horrifying, and he is known as the Death Doctor. That was kind of his nickname that he had been given, but his real name was Harold Frederick Shipman. Now, I've seen a lot of people either call him Harold or Frederick. Personally, I'm going to call him Harold throughout this. Harold was born in Nottingham, England, and he was the middle child to his father, Harold Sr., and his mother, Vera. And his family was, pretty religious. They were of working class, so it wasn't, an extraordinary life or anything like that, but he was always one to excel in school. He was always one to excel in sports, and he ended up passing his 11 plus, which is basically a test that determines if you go to secondary school or grammar school. And because he was so incredibly intelligent, he ended up going to High Pavement Grammar School in Nottingham, where he just continued to excel. He ended up running long distance while in school. He was, the captain of the athletic team. So by all accounts, he was just an average kid. He was highly intelligent, highly athletic. He was looked up to by his peers because of how much he excelled, and he would hopefully go on to lead a great life. But unfortunately, something very tragic happened early on in his life. His mother was one of the people he was closest to. He absolutely loved his mother. They had a great bond, but unfortunately, she ended up being diagnosed with lung cancer, which was very, very difficult for Harold to deal with. She was rapidly declining, and he offered basically to be her caretaker. He made sure she was okay, but he still attended school. He was kind of juggling a lot at that time, and he was watching as she was declining. Nurses and doctors would come to their home. At this point, it was kind of home visits or nothing, and they would always administer morphine to her to help her ease the pain. That's a very typical thing to do in terminally ill cancer patients because it just gets to the point where all you can do is make them comfortable. And he would watch the nurses and doctors administer this medicine and see how much it kind of relaxed her and calmed her and took her pain away. And then at the age of 17, on January 21st, 1963, he ended up watching his mother die. And as you can imagine, this is something that would be very, very difficult for a young boy to go through. But he kind of reacted in a very odd way. He kind of just casually brought it up that next Monday at school. His friends were wondering why he didn't seem more upset about it, and they asked him, what did you do? And he said, well, I just went out for a run. So when his mother died, he just went out and apparently ran until 2 a.m. in the pouring rain. So while he might not have really emotionally been showing it on the outside, clearly it was something that hit him very hard. And from this moment is when he pretty much made a vow to go to medical school himself. And you would think that means he wanted to help save people, but unfortunately, that just wasn't really the case. By the next year, Harold left grammar school, and just 2 years after that, he married a woman named Primrose that he met in school because she was about 5 months pregnant with their child when they got married, and despite her family not agreeing with this at all, they went on with the marriage. And by 1970, he was studying medicine at Leeds School of Medicine. He immediately started working at a general infirmary in West Riding of Yorkshire, and he was kind of known in this infirmary as really encouraging people. At this point, he was still in school, and a lot of the students that were kind of nervous to start things or try things, he really was one that was like pushing them and encouraging them to do it. So he was very, very well liked, and he seemed incredibly confident in what he was doing. After working in the general infirmary for a couple of years, he actually took his very first general practitioner position in 1974 in a center in West Yorkshire. But this is kind of where things started to go a little bit downhill. Again, he was known as being someone that was incredibly brave. He had great work ethic. Everyone kind of looked up to him. But he started having these blackouts that were kind of questionable, and a lot of his coworkers started noticing them. He ended up collapsing in the bathtub one day at home, and he went to a doctor and came back and told everyone that he just had epilepsy and that he couldn't drive a car anymore. It was this big elaborate story, and Primrose offered to take him to and from work so that he could keep his license. But unfortunately, that was all just one giant lie, because they ended up finding out that he actually was addicted to painkillers that were commonly used during child labor. It was only a year into working as a general practitioner, and he essentially was caught forging prescriptions. He would either overprescribe for patients, usually elderly patients in a local nursing home, so he could take the extra, or he would just flat out forge these prescriptions to get his hands on these drugs. But when he was caught, he kind of threw in the towel easily and agreed to go to a rehabilitation center to work on his drug use. But by 1977, he ended up coming straight out of the rehabilitation program. He said he was completely better and immediately went to another medical center near Manchester. I think it was technically in Hyde, and he took an interview to be a general practitioner at a place called Donnybrook. Now, the reason that this place even hired him despite his past was because of his honesty toward it. He was completely open about the fact that he did struggle with addiction, but that he went to a rehabilitation center and was fine. He admitted that he had forged these prescriptions, and it really kind of took them back a little bit, and they thought, you know, he's being honest, so we might as well give him a second chance. So he was hired. Now, he worked really, really hard for Donnybrook Medical, so they thought, for I think between 12 and 15 years. He became really close to the people that he was working with. In this time period, he was really excelling in the world of medicine, and he went on many different talk shows and documentaries because he was a huge advocate for mental health and all these other things. But out of nowhere, he told Donnybrook he was leaving, this was in 1992, to start his own office. And I think the office was called the Surgery from what I've seen. That's all it said in front of the building. And it was only, I think, on the same block, maybe a couple blocks away from Donnybrook. And this took a lot of his coworkers by surprise. He seemed to be silently planning this for a while. And at this point, because he was such a well-known doctor, he had 3,000 patients that he took from Donnybrook over to the surgery. So it was kind of this gigantic deal. He basically had taken all their patients. From the outside, it genuinely appeared to most people, including his patients, that he was an amazing practitioner. Now, he continued to practice medicine all through the 80s, all through the 90s, and by the late 90s, people started noticing some very, very strange things about Harold's practices. And this is when the truth about his career started to slowly come out. In March of 1998, the local funeral home started to realize that Harold had an alarming number of elderly patients die under his care. And it wasn't just the funeral home that was noticing it. It was some of his coworkers, other people from, I think, other offices were noticing that something was weird. And they all kind of came together to say that there had to be something off. So the owner of the funeral home, it was a family run, ended up going to Harold to kind of confront him about it himself before getting authorities involved, because they all went to him as their general practitioner, and he was so trustworthy to all of his patients. They all believed him 100%. He was known to be this kind, caring guy. He always went out of his way for you, so they didn't want to immediately go to authorities and throw him under the bus. So the undertaker ended up going to Harold and being like, look, we've got a lot of people questioning why you have so many deaths occurring, and you want them all to be cremated, and you've signed their death certificates yourself, and then you've had random people for secondary signatures, and it's just something's not adding up. But Harold was able to pull out every single document he had and show it to the undertaker. He was incredibly upfront. He didn't seem upset, he didn't seem surprised, he didn't seem any strange rational emotion. He seemed very, very calm, and he said, if someone has questions, here are all the answers. I have all of my stuff in order. You have nothing to worry about. So this is when they kind of dropped it, and they ended up feeling very, very guilty actually about bringing this up to him, because again, this was their doctor, and they went to see him afterwards, and he remained just as kind as he always had, just as honest as he always had. So everything quieted down for a little bit until another coworker noticed that something just wasn't quite right.
Across the road at this neighbouring practice in 1998, they became suspicious.
They were first aroused in early 1998. It was really around the fact that all of my team, the 5 doctors, had all noticed that we were doing more cremation forms on behalf of Dr. Shipman than it seemed normal for that time of year, even though it had been a bitter winter. The turning point was a couple of weeks after this. The undertakers, the masses, mentioned to one of my team, Dr. Susan Booth, that they were concerned that they were attending far more deaths of Dr. Shipman than any other doctor in Hyde. They were also concerned that Dr. Shipman had been to see the patient frequently on the day of death. They were also concerned that the manner in which they found the patient was unusual, in that the patient wasn't found lying in bed in the nightclothes. The patient wasn't found collapsed, fully clothed. The patients were frequently found fully dressed, but resting in their chairs with no signs of injury and certainly no contributory signs of illness around them in the form of drugs or anything like that.
So authorities ended up being contacted, and they started a small investigation. Now, they saw that this was strange as well, but again, when they approached Harold, he brought out all of his documents. He said he had all of his things lined up. He had all of the death certificates. He had every single file from every single patient to show that they were ill prior to their death. He had everything in order from what it appeared, so they kind of just dropped it again. They thought, there's no more to look into. He has everything in order. I don't think they even did a background check, so if they had, they would have seen that he had already kind of messed up by forging prescriptions once before. It might have pushed them to look further into it. But basically, again, he just kind of explained it away. And there were other people that came to his aid and said, he's a very trustworthy doctor. He has a lot of elderly patients that come to him. It's understandable that he has a large number of patients dying under his care because he's seeing them at incredibly old age. They are all trusting him. They've been with him for years at this point. But then there was one woman that questioned things and she would not drop it. And it ultimately led to the final truth of what Harold Shipman was actually doing in the surgery. There was a woman named Kathleen Grundy, and she was an 81-year-old woman that was found dead in her home on the 24th of June, 1998. And her daughter, Angela, had a lot of questions about her death. Harold had been the last person to see Kathleen, and he had also been the one to sign her death certificate. And he had listed old age as the cause of death. But Kathleen Grundy was a very well-known woman in this community. She was 81 years old, but she was incredibly athletic. Everyone knew her to be very lively. She wasn't struggling with any illnesses that anyone knew of, so her death came as a complete shock to a lot of people. But Harold introduced a lot of strange behavior that made Angela question even more what really happened to her mother. She asked for an autopsy report, and Harold said that because it was just a death of old age, there was absolutely no reason to do that there was no reason to cut her mother up in order to find that it was just old age, as he said. But the icing on the cake was when Harold came forward with a will that Kathleen had supposedly written up. And it doesn't seem that strange that a mother might write up a will without their daughter's knowledge, except for the fact that Angela was a lawyer. She was an attorney, and she handled all of her mother's legal matters, and she would have been the one to draw up this will herself. And something seemed very, very off about it, especially because majority, if not all, of Kathleen's estate for some reason was being handed over directly to Harold. And it's not very common for you to hand over all of your assets to your doctor. So Angela went straight to authorities to say that she highly believed that this will was forged and that her mother was not someone that just died of old age and something else happened. And this kind of forced authorities to take another look into things. Originally, they were just looking into this will, but they had no idea the kind of mess that they were about to be in the middle of. They had no idea how far this all went. So they believed that one of the best ways to find out and verify if this will was in fact known of by Kathleen was to track down the witnesses that had to sign the will as well. And the man they found had an interesting story. Apparently this man was, I think, just sitting in the waiting room of the surgery, which is Harold's office, and Harold peeked out of one of the rooms and said, hey, this woman I don't think has anyone to sign this. Do you mind coming and signing a medical form to help her out? And I think he basically described it as this woman was going to be a part of, I think it was just some study being done on old age, I think is how he explained it. And she was aware of it. She said that she knew what it was, that she was being a part of a study, and the paper was actually folded over so the man couldn't see any of the details or read it. He only could see where he had to sign. And when you hear a woman agreeing to something, this woman's agreeing to what the doctor is saying. The doctor is saying it's fine. She just needs like one more signature. He didn't think much of it. So he signed it having no idea that he actually was signing a will that she had no idea about. And this is when they realized something with Harold Shipman was really, really wrong. So at this point, they wondered if he maybe did something to Kathleen Grundy so that she would die. And he would then in turn get anything from this will. But again, they're just assuming, even if that is the case, maybe it was just this one-time thing But again, they had no idea how far this was going to reach. So the only way to really confirm that she did die of old age was by exhuming her body. And obviously, that is kind of a last-ditch effort that authorities use because that's sacred ground for the family. And that's a huge moment when you bury your family member, and to bring them back up is not something that anyone wants to have to experience. It is a massive, massive job for those that are actually doing it to make sure they preserve everything still, but it was the absolute only way. And they were able to use muscle tissue and I think tissue from her liver, and they tested it and found she had lethal doses of morphine in her body, meaning that she died of a morphine overdose. And they were able to see that this overdose occurred within 3 hours of her death. And guess who had been doing a home visit within that time frame? Harold Shipman. As soon as this was found, authorities immediately went to go and raid Harold's home. But of course, he had crazy answers to why this was all going on. He claimed that Kathleen was actually addicted to these drugs and that he was just helping her and that it had nothing to do with him, but not a single person that was close to her had ever had any idea she was addicted to drugs, and the story just wasn't adding up at all.
Shipman was interviewed by detectives. Sessions were recorded. They reveal he attempted to lie his way out of trouble, even suggesting a victim had abused drugs.
I had my suspicions that she was actually abusing a narcotic of some sort. But the scenario was there, and she did have drugs available. She may well have given herself accidentally an overdose.
He even tried to show authorities notes that he had written in his journal to corroborate the fact that he knew this entire time that she was on drugs. So authorities were looking deeper into all of these notes when they realized that these notes were actually written after her death. So despite the fact that this man thought he was smart enough to overdose a woman and then forge her will and then get a death certificate that required no autopsy, he had really not thought of the fact that his computer was timestamping all of his notes. So basically, he had gone in after the fact to make sure that everything that happened beforehand with his different visits with her matched what was on the death certificate and his story as to how she died to cover his tracks. And when they were raiding the home, they wanted to look specifically for a typewriter because they believed, again, he was the one that forged this will, and he actually willingly handed it over, which is not something that authorities expected him to do. When they were able to test the ink and everything about the typewriter against the will, it was in fact a match. He had forged this will himself. Now, they also found in the home a large amount of jewelry. I think it was about $13,000 worth of jewelry. And they also went and raided the surgery as well and found an incredibly alarming rate of medical records, which made them believe it was highly possible that Kathleen was not his first victim. So authorities decided to start going through other deaths that Harold himself had certified, and I think they went through about 150 at first, and it did not take them long at all to realize a pattern. And once the news about Kathleen got out, a bunch of other families that had been through a death, of someone that was under the care of Harold started coming forward and saying, wait a minute, this sounds so much like when my family member died. The same thing. Harold came, it was a home visit. It was said that it was natural death, but they all died sitting in like an armchair. And normally when it's a natural death, it happens while they're sleeping or they're incredibly ill and unable to get out of bed. But all of these people were clothed like they had just come back from taking a quick trip to the mall or to the grocery store. And they were just sitting in areas of their home where it just didn't make sense. If they were so sick, if they were so on the verge of death, none of it made any sense at all. There was even one woman in particular where, she was sitting actually in a different place than she normally would entirely. She normally would sit and she would always have a view out the window because she had a lot of people visit her and she would immediately see them and get up to open the door to welcome them. Well, the day that she died, her neighbor said she was coming in the house and Harold was leaving, and she also was sitting with her back to the window. And that's how the neighbor knew something was wrong, and that's how this woman's daughter knew something was wrong. And that began exhumation after exhumation over and over again. Body upon body, I think it was 12 in all, were exhumed to see if they had in fact died of natural causes, and every single one came back that they had died from lethal amounts of morphine. There was one case after another where they were able to prove he had gone in after the patient had died and he had completely changed and added documents. There were circumstances where he took away documents that would prove that the person, was in great physical health. There were even instances where it showed that he had gone in and marked these people as dead before they were even dead. It was just very, very obvious what was going on here. And this was the one aspect of what he was doing where he just was very messy with his work. And he basically used all of those documents to shut families up, because obviously he was killing healthy people that were not terminally ill at all. And the families would, quickly question this. It would take them by surprise and they would be confused and upset. And basically he would take these documents and show them to them and be like, I don't know what to tell you. This is what it is. And it would easily get them to be quiet. But to make matters worse, authorities were worried that there was quite a large handful of victims they would never be able to positively link to Harold, because he would sometimes also convince families to cremate their loved ones. They would be completely against cremation at first, but he would push them so hard that they would finally do it, and authorities wouldn't have a body to test anymore for morphine. So it made it incredibly difficult for them to link him to a lot of other potential murders. On September 7th of 1998, he was arrested, and the trial was incredibly publicized and very, very intense. Harold's lawyers tried multiple different methods to undermine those that really looked into the deaths. I mean, they did some dirty, dirty work, and fortunately for those that had to go through that, it didn't end up working in their favor, because there was just too much evidence against him and so many people started coming forward. They were trying to figure out where he was getting all of this morphine to kill these patients, and they ended up finding a man that had been convinced by Harold for years that he had cancer. This man went to multiple different hospitals where these doctors told Harold, your patient does not have cancer. But instead of telling that to this man, Harold would say, yeah, well, your cancer's gotten worse. We need to up your morphine dose. And he basically used that to get to his supply of weapons. And what makes it even more terrifying is that this man's father finally approached Harold and said, what's going on with my son? There's something wrong here. I don't think he has cancer. I think you're giving him way too much morphine. And basically, because this man got too close to figuring out what Harold was doing, Harold in turn ended up killing him on Christmas Eve. And then a taxi driver came forward, someone that you wouldn't necessarily expect. And he said that he had wanted to come forward to authorities about his suspicions about Harold for years, but his wife encouraged him not to because they were so scared they would become a victim. So basically, this taxi driver said that he had about 24 of his regular customers all die in the same way, and they all had one common denominator, and that was Harold Shipman. And he became very suspicious that Harold was doing something to all of these people. And finally, when Harold was arrested, he felt safe enough to come forward and talk to authorities about this. And it was just one thing after another started to come up. More and more people started coming forward saying that they had seen a pattern a long time ago, but again, were too scared to come forward. I think on one particular street, there were 6 deaths on the exact same street of people all under his care. Coworkers came up on the stand and said that there were many times where Harold was very reluctant to even try to revive patients. It was almost like he just wanted to watch them die. There were family members that came forward saying that he would pretend to call emergency services for their loved one, but after records were looked into, he never actually made the call. Again, he pretended to get everyone to sit and wait, to basically watch their loved one die. He didn't want these people to be saved, and he used so much manipulation, and there were so many lies to keep people quiet and to keep this a secret. Harold was officially charged with the murder of, I think, 15 women, and they tried to charge him for, I think, 18 more, but I am not sure the exact total that he ended up being charged with. All of them he had given lethal doses of morphine to between 1995 and 1998. So that's 15 women in just that short time period, and that's not even all of the people that he killed. On January 31st of 2000, after 6 days of deliberation, the jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to 15 consecutive years in prison, giving him a whole life sentence, which essentially means he had absolutely no chance at all of parole. Authorities had originally really wanted to charge Harold for many, many other crimes. There was so much more involved in this, and there are so many documentaries out there you guys can watch that really go into detail of how every single family was affected by this and all of the things that he did to them behind the scenes. But there was such a huge amount of publicity that they were really worried it would ruin a fair trial the more they tacked on that could potentially be questionable, and he would somehow slip away. And they knew that they could prove these 15 murders and that would put him away with a whole life sentence, so they just stuck with that. But unfortunately, even with him behind bars, the investigation didn't stop because they had no idea how many more people he had actually murdered. So in 2001, a detective was put onto the case, and he started looking at more possible deaths that were at the hands of Harold. And by July of 2002, it was found that he had killed likely at least 215 patients total between 1975 and 1998. 215. But unfortunately, 215 wasn't likely the final number. The judge that ended up submitting this report stated that there were more than likely many more deaths linked to Harold. They just couldn't prove it. One of the main reasons being that he forced a lot of families into cremation, and there was just no body to test. And at that point, even just the documents alone would have been very circumstantial information, and there was no way they could formally pin him for any of those murders. Harold had a total of somewhere around 500 patients die under his care. 215 of those he definitely did kill, but that leaves so many more potential victims that they just couldn't prove. I've seen estimates go as high as maybe like 250 to 270, but again, there was just no knowing. And there was even speculation that Harold was responsible for the death of a 67-year-old woman named Margaret Thompson that died only months after he earned his license, meaning that he potentially went into this knowing and planning on using it as a way to murder people. Many people created theories, and there was a ton of speculation as to his reasoning behind all of this because he denied everything. His wife stood by him this entire time and did not believe he was guilty, so people could pretty much only speculate. But there was one obvious thing that stood out. What he did to kill his patients was very similar to what he watched his mom go through when she had cancer. Now, a lot of people believe that because he was so close to his mother and watched the process of his mother dying and this morphine being administered to her, he became fascinated with controlling death. And he had been addicted to drugs, and he had a very addictive personality, so they believed he basically became addicted to killing. So the investigation was just ongoing, and there were plenty of other families that wanted answers, and a lot of people, where it had been proven their family member had been murdered by him, wanted an apology. They wanted justice. But unfortunately, on January 13th, 2004, just short years after he was convicted and put in prison, he was found dead in his prison cell, I'm pretty sure just a day before his birthday. He hanged himself with bed sheets from his prison window. This caused a gigantic uproar of so many different kinds. The families of victims said that they felt cheated. They said that he had in fact been put in prison and that was some sort of justice in their eyes, but he never apologized. He never admitted to anything. He never gave anybody any answers. He left dozens of other families wondering if their family member was lost at his hands. They felt like they had been cheated. And then there were groups of people that were celebrating his death. He was described as a cold coward in some articles, while other articles, the headlines were "Ship, ship, hooray" after his death. It was just insane. And a lot of people started questioning the justice system and how they were unable to prevent someone like that from ending their own life within their cell. It caused a whole lot of issues with how prisoners were handled. It caused a whole lot of issues with how sentences were given, and the idea of a whole life sentence, you're more likely to lose a prisoner to suicide. And a lot of people also questioned why he would have done this, since he was so hell-bent on the fact that he was not guilty. There were some rumors that he did this to secure his wife's financial security. So from what I've seen, and I am unsure if this is true or not, it was said that if he reached over the age of 60, she would no longer receive a pension. So he wanted to end his life sooner than that so that she would continue to receive money and his children would continue to receive money. But a lot of people also believed that he actually did this because his wife was starting to doubt his innocence. So again, I am unsure if this is true or not. I have maybe seen it only on 2 different sources, but he was supposed to be going to courses that ultimately would hopefully lead to him confessing and apologizing for his crimes, but he refused to be cooperative. And because of this, he had privileges taken away, and one of those privileges was phone calls to his wife. So a lot of people believe that when this distance kind of occurred, she started to really question things because he likely was manipulating her into thinking he was innocent. Now again, we are unsure if this is true at all, but according to one of his cellmates, during this time period, his wife started sending him letters saying that she wanted to know the truth, and he got scared that she had found things out and he didn't want to have to admit the truth, so he ended his life. But unfortunately, we will never really know the true reasons behind why he did what he did, and unfortunately also because of this, we might not ever know how many victims he had. 6 separate doctors ended up being charged for signing cremation forms for Harold's victims. Authorities believed that they should have seen a pattern. They should have seen that something was wrong. All of the doctors ended up being found not guilty, and around this point, authorities were even thrown under the bus because they had originally done an investigation on him, and they hadn't even found that there were patterns in this. It's just absolutely terrifying to see how well he was able to carry himself and his bedside manner, where he really manipulated people into believing that he was this really honest and compassionate doctor. I mean, think about what it would take if you were working in a funeral home and you were just seeing body after body after body come in, all under the same doctor, all very, very similar circumstances, to the point where you're convinced there's something going on, to where you confront this man. Can you imagine feeling that strongly that they're doing something wrong, and then to go into his office and speak to him, and then you come out feeling guilty? If that doesn't tell you the level of manipulation that this man had on people. And on top of murdering these people, he also stole their jewelry. I think 66 pieces ended up belonging to Primrose, but 30 something did not. And I think only 1 item out of the 33 pieces ended up being claimed by someone, which kind of makes your head go even more. Because of all of this, there ended up being a change in medical procedures, and it's known as something called the Shipman effect. So many doctors became scared of, what he did and being pinned for something like that, and everyone had their eyes so closely on pain medication that a lot of doctors became scared of over-prescribing. So they, in turn, did the opposite and started under-prescribing, and a lot of people that desperately needed medication ended up barely being able to get it from their doctors. A lot of them weren't able to get it at all. A lot of people not even directly involved in this situation were now directly suffering from it. This ended up changing the way that death certificates were managed. It also started a movement of multiple doctor general practices instead of single doctor practices, so that there was more of kind of a buffer there and a chance of catching and monitoring doctors' decisions, so that hopefully something like this wouldn't happen again. I also think it's very unfortunate because in cases with serial killers like this, where there are just so many victims, it's almost impossible. I couldn't even find the names of pretty much any of the victims. I got one very, very short list, but that list didn't match up with another list, and it's just, I feel like the victims totally got lost, and the amount of pain that this caused, the amount of families that had to sit there and watched their loved one exhumed alone is probably one of the most painful things they've gone through after already having to lay them to rest and then questioning if the doctor, the one that was supposed to be taking care of them, killed them. It hurt so many people, and I think it's heartbreaking that we can't even get majority of their names, and that so many families will still go on forever without potentially knowing if their loved one was in fact a victim.
These are the women Shipman murdered. Not one was suffering from any serious illness. Everyone died suddenly after a visit from Dr. Shipman. There is little doubt, said the judge, each victim smiled and thanked you as she submitted to your deadly ministrations. You brought them death disguised as the attentiveness of a good doctor.
That is all for my story for you guys today. It was absolutely insane researching through this. It was absolutely insane watching the different documentaries for this. I have one documentary linked down below, but there are plenty of them out there on YouTube and little short interviews that you can see. So there's plenty more that you guys can research into on your own if you are interested. But that's it for me, you guys, today. Thank you so much for listening to the story of what happened to these victims. Don't forget, you guys, to go ahead and hit the subscribe button so you can become a member of the Hallan fam, so hopefully we can bring them home together, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.